So in terms of the different methodological approaches that medical anthropologists take, we have, and again, Singer and Bear highlight many of these over the course of the textbook and their various summaries of articles that they are covering in the context of the class, as well as those four case studies that they often highlight in the beginning of the chapter. Uh, so direct observation and behavioral observation, you can follow individuals or stay in one place and observe what's going on in a particular social setting. So are you more interested in what an individual is doing versus what's happening in a particular space? Interviews that can take place both informally, so informal conversations could also be construed as interviews. And again, the issue of consent here becomes really important for anthropologists to let individuals know that they are in fact researchers, and that's explicitly why they're in communities, uh, particularly when they're doing informal type of interviewing. Semi-structured interviews where you would have a list of questions preset, predetermined. This might be done in unison with individuals that you're working with, or in fact, very structured interview formats where you ask one question and then you proceed to the next question. You do not deviate from the structured interview format. That way everyone gets the same interview experience overall, each of the interviewees. Archival work, which is important for anthropologists because we are looking at issues and phenomena in deep historical depth, as well as looking at how social and political change has influenced particular conditions. And so this archival work can be important to sort of look at some of the history of these types of situations in the longer term. So, for example, Braff looks very clearly at the case of birth control as well as assisted reproductive technologies and it looks at the divide between rich and poor in Mexico and looks at some of the discourse surrounding population growth in Mexico. And although it's very close to what we see in the United States today in terms of population growth, nevertheless, there's still the sense of some that that there is in fact a overpopulation problem that exists in Mexico. However, in her work, she also demonstrates very clearly too how the Mexican government, how the state itself has varied in terms of either promoting population growth or promoting control or checks on that population growth. Surveys, again, this is typically a lot of this work is done by sociologists as well. You could see this in marketing as well. This can be coupled with qualitative methods in order to help to build the survey. In fact, Anthropac has this built into the program overall. This is Steve Borgatti's work. Ethnosemantic elicitation, this would include things like the work that Spradley did in first eliciting domains and then populating those domains and creating trees, structures. You could do free list exercise with individuals, list all the different types of flops that you know, for example. And you could do pile sorts, you know, looking at, well, what type of flop is this, and so forth and so on. You could also, in addition to pile sorts, you could do things like triad tests and other things with this information once you develop it. And again, there's entire courses that you could take very explicitly looking at this type of work of ethnosemantic elicitation or ethnoscience, cognitive anthropology work. Consensus analysis, looking at the most frequent responses, and this can also be paired with how individuals are going to list those. Like, what do individuals consistently rank first, second, or third versus what doesn't come until later on in the interview process. A good resource for this I've always found has been H. Russell Bernard's work, his research methods in anthropology. He's updated this fairly consistently through the years. So this is one sort of clearinghouse of information. It's likely to be used in general introductory methods courses, both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So in going on here with this mixed method approach, some of the other work that's been done is focus groups. These can be either directed or or not directed. And you see examples of this in many classrooms where instructors will ask you to sit in a group of 4 or 5 other students, and essentially there'll be a list of questions which you'll go through, or it could be on a general topic, or not directed at all, just sitting in a particular location and just talking, and then that information would be recorded. This can be somewhat problematic in terms of implementing this, particularly if you want to guarantee confidentiality and tapes are made, and particularly videotapes are made of individuals speaking. This is something that, as Singer and Bear note, anthropologists have drawn in from marketing studies, talking about things like products. And there's some work in economic anthropology which talks about things like love marks, how individuals want to feel a very strong connection to particular products, and how is that created through marketing as a whole. One of the other techniques is the life history interviews, oral history work, which focuses on a specific life and circumstances in order to highlight the lived or embodied experience. So, if you're talking about, for example, with an individual who's been diagnosed with cancer, and that has also been found to be cancer-free after 5 years, 3 or 5, 7 years, depending on the type of cancer and the particular medical system. You have you would talk to that individual about the entire course of their experience with cancer, and what they felt at the time. And these can be very powerful types of stories. And there's some interesting discussion in the context of human rights too, where you have the sheer number and volume of people that have been affected in terms of statistics. So sort of a large type of scale of analysis versus looking at oral history and how oral history can reveal those individualized experiences that individuals who might not necessarily know about things like structural violence, which is a critique from in the context of critical medical anthropology. They might not necessarily know about these things, but the lived experience of one individual might be more persuasive in imparting the importance of particular issues to individuals versus all of these statistics overall. So there's a real value, I think, in the work of life history work and oral history work as a whole. Diaries, where you get the insider descriptions of behaviors and experiences at the time of the particular event. And Singer and Bear note, for example, the drug use events, and how these diaries in and of themselves created this greater reflexivity of participants who then reached out to those conducting the study in order to help them. They realized they had a problem once they started writing all of these things down in the journals. Singer and Bear also note the issue with finding statistically significant populations, and how exactly that's done in terms of sampling. Who do you select to inform? Do you get to a theoretical saturation where you're not getting any new information, where you have a broad representative of the population? And they highlight one such model, this venue-based sampling, or VBS, that they discuss further on pages 64 and 65. They also highlight that anthropologists and those working both in medical anthropology and anthropologists as a whole often collaborate with other researchers, and they provide the example of climate change, where there are a number of different scientists that are working on a variety of aspects with climate change, and anthropologists certainly can play a role here in looking at some of the impacts of climate change and how climate change is understood at the local level as well. So some of the applied activities of medical anthropologists, often what's talked about in the course of the text, are these research studies. But applied or medical anthropology includes not only research, but also applied aspects in other areas as well. An emphasis on addressing real world problems, which often stems from the research itself, or often inspires the research that's being done. Designing as well as overseeing intervention programs. So an example of this is Trotter's work published in 1996 in Flagstaff, Arizona, where the focus was on drug users in order to prevent the spread of AIDS. And one of the issues that was problematic, particularly in Flagstaff, that there was no so-called hot spots where drugs were typically bought and sold. And so there was no really one place where researchers could get information or find potential individuals that would potentially be willing to share information with them once they had built rapport with those individuals. So what Trotter had to do was go out into the community and find the social networks, find individuals who were connected through to one another through these diffuse social networks. And once those social networks were understood, Trotter was able to bring those individuals together from that same social network in terms of drug distribution and use and discuss what can be done to slow down and stop the spread of AIDS. So this is one example where intervention programs were done utilizing anthropological methods, particularly social network analysis, in order to bring individuals together in focus groups to more thoroughly discuss the issues that were going on. One of the uh, other areas that anthropologists can work in is the idea of program evaluation. So looking at things like international development, local development issues, applied medical intervention projects, and see what's actually being done, how successful are programs overall. The other thing that anthropologists, medical anthropologists, can do is to establish and put into practice ethical principles and decision making in the healthcare setting. So at the end of the chapter here, Singer and Baer talk about some of the future issues of medical anthropology. And they paint with pretty broad brushstrokes here, and they note that, and these are, of course, some of the same types of issues that are occurring outside of medical anthropology, in anthropology as a whole. In fact, many of these are sort of highlighted by Clifford Geertz's work in Constant Profession, where he essentially reviews his career retrospective of it's his account of his career, and at the end he sort of highlights some of the same things here. Singer and Baer, of course, are a little more focused on in the medical context as a whole. So certainly globalization plays a role and facilitates the spread of disease. And along with this, we see urbanization with megacities over 10 million people. And Oliver Smith was talking about this in the mid-'80s in terms of the idea that once you have urban environments, and of course this comes from geography as well, this helps to facilitate the spread of disease, but also makes populations more vulnerable. And this is in part what Singer and Baer talk about in the text, this syndemic interaction. So overall, between these various factors as a whole, climate change paired with other forms of environmental degradation lead to what they refer to as eco-crisis interactions. Decrease in food and water security, again, from my own work and my own perspective here, we see this with the increasing commodification of both food and water, as well as all aspects of the process of growing food and, again, procuring water. This has been confronted at the international level with the United Nations and the international, the right to food, which, of course, we see a lot of tension with this in the context of international development, as well as the economics of food production and distribution and exchange in how much of the food across the world is being grown today. We also see, of course, the marginalization of smallholders and the tension that exists between the work that they're doing and some of the larger structural issues in terms of the politics of, for example, grain dumping and its impact on small farmers, smallholders in Latin America, for example, with corn production. Capitalism and commodification, not only in the context of food, but also of the body itself. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the examples and the particular work on cadavers, living cadavers, looking at the trade in Bangladesh and India, and then global increase in violence over limited resources, war and violence, and the impacts that that has. So I hope to have given you guys a good review of Singer and Baer's chapter here, looking at 4 case studies, some of the issues, the particular focus, as well as methods and applied activities of medical anthropologists.